All right, thank you very much. And okay. My name is Giacomo Folinazzo. Great pleasure to be here today and presenting a study that I conducted over the last couple of years as part of my dissertation. And so we're going to look at mediation-based action-oriented tasks as a vehicle to promote authenticity and language learner agency. So I'd like to just briefly talk about my background because it gives a bit of a context to the situation. So I was born in Canada, but I grew up in Italy. Then I lived in Japan. Last year, I moved back to Italy, and I moved 22 times in my life. And I was always the foreigner wherever I lived. They always seen me as either the Canadian in Italy or the guy from the South, in Italy, or the Italian here. So there's always been that idea of having to learn a language quickly, having to learn the culture quickly to be able to survive, to be able to find a job, to be able to have friends, to be able to really be part of society. And that has led to become a language instructor. So I've been teaching EAP and test and applied linguistics courses over the last 20 years. And I remember when I started my PhD studies, I said, I've been teaching languages for 20 years. I've been learning languages my whole life and having to adapt. But I would like to really find there's something missing. I would like to find a new way, a new methodology, a new approach, because I think that what's out there right now, it didn't seem to me that it was working. So there are three research questions, but for today's presentation, I'd like to talk about how, to what extent mediation-based tasks and the action orientation impacts learners' agency, which is related to, of course, the presentation you just saw and the other ones you will hear today. The theoretical framework for my study comes from complexity theory. Complexity theory is really interesting because it became the overarching meta theory of my study. And it was borrowed from the natural sciences. So complexity theory understands that language is a complex dynamic system. The language is not just 1 + 1 + 1. It's not just the addition of all its parts, but it interacts with other dynamic systems within the person, within society, within interaction, etc. Also, we have plurilingualism and pluriculturalism and sociocultural theory as part of the theoretical framework, and strong influence from mediation from the Common European Framework, particularly the companion volume from 2020. And of course, for the methodology, the action-oriented approach. So all of these theories have, of course, a very, very strong connection. They go hand in hand. From the graphic that you see here, the idea is to illustrate how language is a complex dynamic system, and and as such is dynamic. It moves. So we go away from the Cartesian view of language, as in your presentation, or the Vasid, where you show the language learning as a straight track. We know that language learning is nothing but a straight track. There's so much that needs to be learned and things that change. So the methodology, I created 5 action-oriented tasks, and they were based on mediation, based on the descriptors. And the tasks were important because they were based on learning scenarios, and then they had a task, which was they had to reach a specific goal, but also they had to really engage in authentic use of the language. So that, for example, one of the most popular tasks was students have a budget of about $800, and they have 2 months to spend this budget. And what would they do with this money if rent was paid for, their tuition was paid for, but how would they utilize these $800? So they would work in groups and try to figure out where can I get a discount on Tuesday? Where would I get, Tuesday nights I would receive 10% off at the movie theater, etc. So they're engaged in authentic tasks, but also in authentic material, because it's not simplified ESL or EAP material, but it was from websites, from the real world. So there were 5 tasks. The first 3 were created by me. The 4th and 5th were created with their assistants. So after they understood the methodology, I've asked them, what is it that you would like to do? And they're like, well, how about we interview, we really need to interact with Canadians. We were online at this point. So I said, okay, give me a list of 10 professionals you would like to speak to. So they made a list of 10. Then I picked the top 5. I found people from the community. I think it was a dentist, an actor, a singer, a mechanic. and then they interacted with them. So they took membership of the creation of the tasks. So we had 12 participants from 8 different countries around the world. They were all about a B1 level. All the sessions were recorded on Zoom. And the way they worked is we would meet, I would set up the task, and then they would break into breakout rooms, complete the task, everything was recorded. And then at the end, there was an artifact, which is part of the action-oriented approach, which is the co-creation of this artifact. And at the end, they would present this artifact, whether it was a presentation or a result of an interview, etc., presented to class. Everything was recorded. And then I had 2 peer observers to avoid any kind of potential inadvertent bias in my work. So I had 2 peer observers who were familiar with the action-oriented methodology, and they observed 2 participants throughout the 5 tasks. And they gave me with a questionnaire, and they gave me what was the beginning of kind of my inductive way of conducting research. Because I wanted to really be careful of not using a deductive way where I would go to the Common European Framework and say, well, here's, I found this, or yes, this is agency, let me find it in my data. I try to be as objective as possible, seeing if the data itself would give me some of these themes. And so I had the 2 peer observers. And then at the end, which was very valuable to me, was the individual interviews with the 12 participants. So the data collection was in the form of video, audio, and transcripts. So these are the different stages of the data collection. There was the instrument creation, the recruitment of the participants. Then there were of course, the task completions, then the observations by the peer observers, the interviews, and then, of course, the analysis of the data. So for data analysis, we had theme identification, and there was clustering, coding in categories. And of course, as I mentioned, the peer observation was mostly inductive with some deductive approaches to data analysis. All the data seem to kind of fall into 4 major categories. The perspective, because what I was interested in the most is what do learners say about the action-oriented approach. So we have approaches, as we've seen for ALE, where it's the instructor, from the point of view of the instructor. We have research that talks about it theoretically. For me, it was really interesting to see how do learners feel about the action-oriented approach, because I find that learners, this is recently, anecdotally, we were adopting a textbook in one of the Italian courses that I teach, and one of the coordinators was really resistant in adopting this particular textbook. And this textbook was not exactly action-oriented, but it kind of was breaking out of the typical kind of grammatical approach. And there was resistance, and she said, no, we can't, because students are not used to this kind of textbook. The textbook that you're proposing, students are not used to it. And my answer was, but who got the students used to that type of methodology, right? So, and the textbook was adopted, and students are actually very excited about it. But the reason why I'm interested in the students' perspective is because we train language learners to be language learners. We're not just teaching them the language, we're teaching them a methodology. So if that's all they've seen, that's all they know. So it was interesting to kind of see their perspective, because they fall into these 4 categories. So we have psychological categories where they're more aware of their likes, their biases. There's a kind of metacognitive component and self-awareness that was there. They're also more aware of their strategies that they're used. For example, I couldn't figure out this word, so I asked my friend in Spanish, and then his friend from Brazil said, yeah, we have the same word in Portuguese, and then kind of through their plurilingual repertoire, they were able to figure out the meaning of a word. Or I need to find this information, where can I go? So they're more aware of the strategies that they use in order to complete a specific task, and usually linguistic. And of course, the other thing that was most important, especially for today's presentation, is the fact that they require to engage their social agency. They needed to be active. So learners were not recipients of knowledge, like they opened their brains and poured the information in. They had to engage their social agency and be conscious that they're doing that, and understand that it's not linear, that they have a unique repertoire, that they can access other people's repertoire with their peers. They can mediate text, they can mediate information, they can mediate interactions, and that's how we complete a task. And in the process of doing this, language learning occurs, their competencies increase. And of course, there's also the strong linguistic component where they feel that their language has improved because they were immersed in an authentic type of activity or task completion. So the findings show that there is an increase in agency. So the agency is required to complete tasks within the scenarios. And as tasks are completed, agency increases. Also, there's this idea that we give learners a bit more autonomy. We trust them. Instead of having classes that are teacher-centered, we have classes that are student-centered, where the students decide the direction of the lesson of the task. And one of the greatest findings was that there is a strong enjoyment, which led to motivation. So this graph here, these two symbols are taken from music, crescendo, which means an increase in intensity and volume. So we have the action-oriented approach and mediation-based task requires their agency. When they require their agency, there's greater self-monitoring, there's greater strategy use, confidence, facilitation of learning space, creation of meaning. And these terms came from the data, but also reflect what the language that's in the Common European Framework and the descriptors. And of course, as a complex dynamic system, going back to the theoretical framework, you see that it's not a linear interaction. It's very chaotic. It's very non-linear. And this increases their autonomy. And then we go back into this kind of cyclical iterative process. And the result is the increase in their competence and their language competence. So the learner's voice was very strong. I'll finish with a quote or kind of paraphrase of one of the learners who said that when asked him, what do you think of this way of learning English? He said, my whole life, he was from Brazil, very, very intelligent young student. My whole life, when I learned a language, they give us a piece of a puzzle. It's like they give us a piece of the puzzle and we talk about the shape, we talk about the color, we talk about the weight, we talk about the smell, and we just stare at this piece of the puzzle. What we've done with this methodology is you've given us the whole puzzle and asked us to put it back together. And to me, so that was the greatest way of learning a language. It's messy, it's chaotic, but that's how we learn language in the real life. So the learner buy-in, and then we go back to the title of how he increases agency. I find that to teach a language properly, we have to teach students how to be students. And in this case here, the learner buy-in is very important because I have students who were taught to never ask a question, that there is a right and a wrong answer in the classroom, that you should conform. We have 60 students in the classroom. Don't you dare be an individual. Don't you dare criticize what I say. This is how it is. There's a right and a wrong. There's an ABC, and this is how we learn a language. You have to pass the IELTS because you need to go to university. If they've done that for 20 years, how can, when they learn in a different method, we need to really get them on their side, on our side. Thank you very much.